Shalom, my dear friends, brothers, sisters. Um, appreciate all of your prayers and those of you, the few of you that still watch me regularly and listen. That you don't seek my voice for wisdom, but you seek the Torah. So I heard some Messianics recently. We're going to get to Proverbs 8 here in a second. They were talking about this prophecy in Luke 4 that, and we're going to go over it, debunk it, and destroy this idea that he had. Because it's important to have truth and not just our imagination. So in Luke 4, he goes into the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he reads from the scroll of Isaiah, Luke 4:17. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him, and he opened the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," and he's trying to claim that the me is him, 700 years after Isaiah wrote this to the people that he was speaking the promise to, because he anointed me, Mashiach, to preach the good news, which the New Testament translates wrongly as gospel, to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, which is not in the DSS. It's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's not in the Masoretic. This is an addition the Septuagint added for some reason, or they added in here for some reason, to free those who are oppressed. So the first question you have to ask is, why wasn't he reading from a Hebrew scroll from the seat of Moses, but he was reading from a Greek scroll? But then the guy who was reading this, he goes, "Can I read from Isaiah 61? He's, the Spirit of the Lord, Yehovah, is upon me." Now, who's speaking here? Isaiah. Isaiah is the one speaking. The context is all about Isaiah, because Yehovah has anointed me to bring the good news to the afflicted, not the poor. Why were they afflicted? Because they were in Babylon, and that's what the context displays to us. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to the captives. And that one I find fascinating. It doesn't even say that. It just says they're oppressed. But no, they were captive. They were in Babylon. Freedom to the prisoners. Not in Luke either. It doesn't say anything about freedom to the prisoners. Just to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord, right? To proclaim the favorable year of Jehovah and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a headdress instead of ashes, the oil of rejoicing instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of spirit of fainting. So they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of Jehovah, that he may show forth his beautiful glory. Then they will rebuild the ancient waste places. This is the key context here. This is the key context. Now, the way that the New Testament records, the Jews responded to him then saying, and he closed the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, sat down, and the eyes of all the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Now, if I was there, I would say, "Really, sir, when were the waste places restored?" Because that's the context. Why did you cut off the context? And all were speaking well of him, marveling at his gracious words, which were coming forth his lips. And they were saying, "Is that not Joseph's son?" And, this goes against the whole idea that everyone reviled him, right? Isaiah 53, which they believe he also fulfilled. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's try again. Because what does Isaiah 53 say? He was reviled universally. Where was that at? He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Did not esteem him. But here and this is throughout the Gospels. You have distinct groups of people, but it says distinctly about the servant of Isaiah 53, no one esteemed him. No one. But here you have people saying that he's just a marvelous teacher. And he said to them, "No doubt you will quote this proverb to me, Physician, heal yourself. Whatever we heard took place at Capernaum, also do here to your hometown as well. And he said, truly, I say to you, no prophet is welcome in his hometown. Which doesn't make even any sense, because look at what it says here. They were speaking well of him and marveling at what he said. And here he's like, oh, I'm not welcome here. What do you mean you're not welcome here? They were speaking well of you. But I say to you in truth that there are many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, when a great famine came over land, and Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel at the time of Elisha the prophet, and of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. I don't know how he knows there were many lepers in Israel, but Torah tells us leprosy is a sign of being cursed. So the fact that he would graciously heal a Gentile is because a Gentile doesn't have knowledge of Torah. Those that are of the tribe of Israel should know that the cause of their leprosy is from their sin, from their action. And then we get all the people in the synagogue were filled with rage as they heard these things. They stood up and drove him out of the city and led him to the edge of the hill, which was the city and had been built, in order to throw him over the cliff. Now, I doubt this all happened. I doubt it. Where are the 2 or 3 witnesses? Where is the judge? You're telling me these men all banded together to just murder a man because he misquoted the Tanakh? It's highly specious. There's no way this happened. And then, of course, we get to the casting out of the unclean demon, which I wanted to make a video on that as well and really get into this, because let me tell you something. Moses never cast out demons. He never sat down with Aaron and said, I see why you built that golden calf. You're possessed by an unclean spirit, by a demon. Let me cast it out of you with fasting and prayer. Never happens. None of the prophets cast out demons. All right. Now let's go to the other passage this guy read, Daniel 9. Where was that verse at that he read? Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks have been determined for your people and for your holy city. So who's he talking to? Daniel. So this is a prophecy Daniel would have seen. This is how prophecy works. It wouldn't have been something that Daniel would have written down to be seen 700 years later. Finish the transgression to make an end of sin. And this is what they focus on, right? That the sin of murder of Jesus can make an end of sin. But that's not what it's about. It's not what it's about. To make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness. And everlasting here is not a great translation of the Hebrew concept. So the concept is not everlasting, it's olam, which can be for a long time. Age enduring is another translation, that it will be a long time, evermore, perpetual. It doesn't mean never ending. So this sin that it's talking about, and the 70 weeks, you have to go back to Daniel 1. And this is the same thing with Isaiah. Like, Isaiah 61 doesn't start at 61. And if you read it, what does he say? The waste places. The waste places. When were the waste places restored? In the first century. If you want to contextually say he fulfilled this passage. And that's what the Jews would have done. They are thinking men. They think in reason. It would have said, excuse me, Mr. Yeshua, son of Yosef. Can you read on? Like, why do you think the waste places that were restored by Ezra and Nehemiah through the Messiah Cyrus, Koresh, why they suddenly need to be restored again? Because that happened 500 years ago. when the prophet Daniel forecast that it would happen. Yes, that's what he's telling you. Like, the whole of Isaiah 40 to 61 is about the Babylonian exile. Daniel 9 is about the Babylonian exile. In the first year, that's what it tells you, Daniel 9:1. The first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, from the seed of the Medes, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, discerned in the books the numbers of the years concerning which the word of Jehovah came to Jeremiah, the prophet, of the fulfillment of the laying waste of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. 70 years. So why does anyone think that the 70 weeks talked about down here is anything other than a direct connection to the 70-year exile? And you read the context beyond one verse, it becomes clear. So you are now to have insight that from the going out of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, and this is the one place in the Old Testament that the Christians actually transliterate anointed one instead of translating it, the prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And this is really awkward too. This whole 7 and 62 crap. It's 69 weeks, 69 years. Now, why does it use the word week? We'll get to that. It will be restored and rebuilt with a plaza, a moat, even in times of distress. So that we know what the 69th week had to have been when they restored and rebuilt Jerusalem through the command of Koresh. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah, Koresh, will be cut off and have nothing. And this happened. Koresh got cut off. So, and then they had to wait for the next king to continue the rebuilding. So look at 1st, 2nd Chronicles, because you can put this all together. Why does Daniel use the word Shavuot, which they translate wrongly as week, in that section? Because if you look at 2nd Chronicles 36, they burned the house of God and tore down the wall of Jerusalem, burned all its palaces with fire, and destroyed all the valuable articles. And those who had escaped from the sword he took away into exile to Babylon. They were slaves to him and his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of Jehovah by the mouth of Jeremiah, that until the land had made up for its Sabbaths. Right there. The land was making up for missed Sabbaths. All the days of desolation, it kept a Sabbath until 70 years were fulfilled. So the 70 years were for the 7 times 70 missed Sabbaths. So you see, it does represent 490 years, but it represents 490 years in the past. 490 years prior to the restoration of Israel, they were missing every Jubilee Sabbath. That is why the exile happened, along with them committing human sacrifice. Something the New Testament teaches you to accept. That the Son of God can be murdered for your sin. If that's not profane enough, I don't know what else to say. I mean, so in Ezra 1, it says, now in the first year of Koresh, king of Persia, in order to complete the word of Jehovah by the mouth of Jeremiah, Jehovah stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, Koresh, king of Persia, so that he had a proclamation passed throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Thus says Koresh, king of Persia, Jehovah, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people may be God with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of Jehovah, the God of Israel. He who is God, who is in Jerusalem. So everyone who remains at whatever place he may sojourn, let the man of that place support him with silver and gold, with goods and cattle, together with a free will offering of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. So Koresh gave the first command, but then the Sanballat came and he disrupted it. And that's what Daniel 9 is telling you about, that the initial command will be disrupted. So Nehemiah 1, the words of Nehemiah the son of Hakaliah. What happened in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, and I was in the Susa, the capital, that Hassani, one of my brothers, and some of men from the Yehuda came and asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and remained from captivity about Jerusalem. They said to me, the remnant there is in the province who remain from captivity are in great calamity, just as Daniel said would happen, and reproach, and the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. Now it happened when I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned, and I was fasting and praying before God of heaven. And I said, beseech you, O Jehovah, God of heaven, the great fearsome God who keeps covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear now be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your slave, which I am praying before you today, day and night, on behalf of the sons of Israel, your slaves, confessing the sins of the sons of Israel, which we have sinned against you, and I and my father's house have sinned. We have worked in utter destruction against you, and we have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments which you commanded your servant Moshe. Remember the words which you commanded your servant Moshe, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though those who have been banished were at the ends of the sky, I will gather them from there, and I will bring them into the place where I have chosen to cause my name to dwell. That's Deuteronomy 31-6. That is the good news. That's what Isaiah was talking about. That though the captives have been scattered to the far winds and corners of the earth, they will be restored to the land. Israel and Yehuda will be reunited. Hallelujah, hallelujah. So they are your slaves, your people whom you redeemed by your great power, by your strong hand. O Lord, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your slave and the prayer of your slaves who delight to fear your name. Make your slave successful today and grant him compassion before this man. Now I was cupbearer to the king. When it happened in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, why is your face sad, though you are not sick? Though it's nothing but sadness of heart. And then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tomb, lies waste and its gates have been consumed by fire? And the king said to me, what would you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. I said to the king, if it is good for the king, and if your servant is good before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tomb, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside you, how long will your journey be? When will you return? So it was good to the king to send me, and I gave him a set time. And I said to the king, if it is good to the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. A letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's force, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress, which is by the house of God, for the wall of the city, for the house to which I will go. And the king granted them to me because the good hand of God was on me. And I came to the governors of the provinces beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent me the commanders of the military force and horsemen. Then Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about it. It was a very great evil to them that someone had come to seek the good of the sons of Israel. So after Koresh's command initially failed, and this is what Daniel prophesied of, that though they would be restored, it would fall again, but that those who prevail for 1335 days, and that's when King Artaxerxes comes, would see the restoration of Israel again. So the end of sin was clearly not talking about all sin. And you can see this in like Ezekiel. Ezekiel also has messianic passages. In Ezekiel 44, it talks about the new temple and that the Messiah, the king, will go up and make an offering for his sin. Verse 27, on the day that he goes into the sanctuary, it's talking about the Messiah, the king. into the inner court to minister in the sanctuary, he shall bring near his sin offering. Which is completely strange when you think about how the Christians believe their Messiah is without sin. But here in Ezekiel is telling you that the Messiah has to make a sin offering. Did he sacrifice Jesus? And it shall be with regard to an inheritance for them, that I am their inheritance, and you shall give them no possession in Israel. I am their possession. They shall eat the grain offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, and every devoted thing in Israel shall be theirs. And this is the other issue with what the New Testament says, guys, because he makes a promise to Moses, to the Levites, that the Levitical priesthood is an everlasting covenant. So, you want to believe the everlasting stuff in Daniel, but not the everlasting stuff in Torah? If the Levites' promise is cut off, if sacrifice truly ends, then they have no inheritance. They're with a nothing, right? It's not just that the sin offering and the guilt offering are for your sin, which none of the Tanakh says will end when the Messiah comes, by the way. It's just you get confused by your Christian doctrines. So you have to make a conscious choice here. Did Jehovah lie to the Levites? Is their inheritance gone? They have no land and they have no food because they can't eat the grain offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering in the future when that thing is restored. And I do believe it will be restored. And the Samaritans, who I believe are truly the remnant of Israel, they perform a Passover offering every year and they eat the lamb. And the first of all first fruits of every kind. And that's kind of interesting given what, Christianity believes, because they put all their eggs in one basket and they believe that the Jews are the true remnant of Jehovah. But the Samaritans never stopped performing Passover offerings on Mount Gerizim, where the Torah tells them to make it. And the first of all, the first fruits of every kind and every contribution of every kind from all your contributions shall be for the priest. You shall also give to the priest the first of your dough to cause a blessing to rest on your house. And the priest shall not eat any bird or beast that has died of itself that has been torn to pieces. Like, the beast of Jesus was torn to pieces before you sacrificed him on the cross. And you believe you're blessed for that. But more important, Father just showed me something else here. Part of the purpose of a sacrificial system that's set up in Torah is that it is a blessing. And this is why Deuteronomy tells you, if you're too far from the land, you can take money to the chosen city and buy an offering there and enjoy it. Eat it. And give a tenth to the priest. It's never what Christians claim. And what's the purpose of the sacrificial system? To have food. Some of these offerings are for sin and guilt, but that's not the majority of them. Every single Mikdaim, the feast, the offerings of the 7 feasts. Pesach is not for sin. And it's so interesting you try to say that he's your Pesach lamb for sin when the Pesach lamb wasn't killed for sin. The Pesach lamb was killed because it was the god of Egypt. This is why they brought it into the house, mocking the Egyptians, then took it out on the street where all the Egyptians could see this, slit its throat, burned its body, and ate it, and then burned the remainder to ashes. They were utterly mocking the Egyptian god. And for you Christians to say that he's the god the Lamb of God, right? So he's the God of Egypt? And you even make it worse because no longer is that pagan god utterly destroyed in the fire, which would make it a valid Passover offering. That's the only way it's a valid Pesach, is if you take the remainder of the body and throw it on the fire. No, you don't do that. After 3 days, you take the body and you consume the flesh and blood and call yourself blessed. This is why I so strongly urge, just stop reading the New Testament for a year. Just read the 5 books of Moses. Look at Leviticus 7:16 here. But if the sacrifice of his offering is a votive or free will offering, and so many countless Messianics and Christians, they'll say it's not human sacrifice because he offered himself. That's still human sacrifice, but okay, let's make it a free will offering. Right here in Leviticus 7:16. Let's say that his profane human sacrifice is a free will offering. That he's taking his body to be like a lamb, making it a free will offering for your sin. Torah doesn't allow it. I'm just making a point here. It shall be eaten on the day he brings near his sacrifice. The next day what is left may be eaten. But whatever is left from the flesh of the sacrifice on the 3rd day shall be burned with fire. If any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings should ever be eaten on the 3rd day, he who brings it near will not be accepted, and it will not be counted to his benefit. It shall be an offensive thing, and the person who eats of it will bear his own iniquity. Tell me that this is not prophetic of the New Testament. That you offer this man, and the 3rd day his body is not consumed with fire, it's risen. The moment a sacrifice rises up, it's profane. A sacrifice is a sacrifice because it is destroyed utterly. If a sacrifice isn't destroyed utterly, it's not a sacrifice. Nothing was lost. And worse, you consume his flesh, you drink his blood, even if you believe this is allegory. It's right here. After the 3rd day, you continue to consume his flesh and drink his blood. And it says, whoever eats of it will bear his own iniquity. It's so powerful. And I wish and pray that more Christians, you just read the Torah. Look at this, Leviticus 17. And this is why it's so important. Understand the rules of offering. Like, even if you overlook that you can sacrifice a man, which is profane, look at this. Where was he sacrificed? He was sacrificed on Golgotha, outside the camp, outside the city. And then Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, to all the sons of Israel, and say to them, this is what Jehovah has commanded, saying, any man from the house of Israel who slaughters an ox, or a lamb, which you say he is, or a goat in the camp, or slaughters it outside the camp, like he was, has not brought it to the doorway of the tent of meeting to bring it near as an offering to Jehovah before the tabernacle of Jehovah, it will be counted as blood guiltiness to the man, as if you murdered someone. Because you did not obey the commandments, and you sacrificed this animal in a profane fashion. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. How does he fulfill Torah when everything about the sacrifice on the cross violates Torah? Everything. Who did it? The Romans. The Romans pierced his body, completing the sacrifice. Are the Romans Levites? Are the Romans allowed to make a sacrifice to Jehovah? What about his body? Deuteronomy 17, verse 1. You shall not sacrifice to Jehovah, your God, an ox or a sheep which has any defect or any blemish, for that is an abominable thing to Jehovah your God. If there is found in your midst, in any of your gates of the towns which Jehovah your God has given you, a man or a woman who does what is evil in the sight of Jehovah your God by trespassing against his covenant, has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, or the sun or the moon, or any of the heavenly hosts, which I have not commanded. If it is told to you, and you have heard it, then you shall inquire thoroughly. See, it doesn't want you to blindly believe, like Paul says. Inquire thoroughly. Test it. Jehovah gave you a brain. Use it. Don't trust your heart. Use your brain. You've heard it, that he was resurrected. Well, inquire thoroughly. Does any of what the New Testament say line up with Torah? Behold, if it is true, and the matter is confirmed that this abomination has been done in Israel, then you shall bring out that man or that woman who has done this evil deed in your gates. That is the man or the woman. You shall stone him to death, and he will die. Like Stephen. Why do you think Stephen was stoned? What he preached was a lie. You say, how do you know that's true? Well, read what it says and compare it to Torah. I mean, it doesn't even take just a couple of these. Acts 7. Acts 7:26. And we'll compare it directly to what he says in Exodus 2. So in Acts 7, it says, on the following day he appeared to them as they were fighting together, and he tried to reconcile them. Okay. I mean, hopefully those of you who you do study your Bible, you know that doesn't happen that way. In peace, saying, men, you are brothers. Why are you treating one another unjustly? But the one who was treating his neighbor unjustly pushed him away, saying, who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And with this remark, Moses fled and became a sojourner in the land of Midian, where he was father of the 2 sons. So look at Exodus 2. Then he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling with each other. And he said to the wicked one, which is the guilty one, the one who started the fight, why are you striking your companion? Completely different. One, he's truly acting like the judge that God intends him to be. He sees a wicked man and he judges him for acting wickedly. And the other, he's trying to reconcile them in peace and blaming both of them for the sin. Why are you striking your companion? Men, you are brothers. Why are you treating each other unjustly? Not even the same. But he said, and this is the wicked one, which wouldn't even make sense. Why wouldn't they both respond? But it says the one who was treating his neighbor unjustly pushed him away. It doesn't say that. It's the wicked one who retorted, said, who made you a ruler or a judge over us? And this makes more sense because he had just judged the wicked one. Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and said, surely the matter has become known. So the New Testament purposely perverted the text to make Moses a peacemaker. But he was a judge. And I bet you could look at a lot of these passages and see the same sort of errors. The text does not say what the New Testament claims. And according to Torah, that's enough by 2 or 3 witnesses to stone someone, that they're teaching you to follow another god. Now, I'm not suggesting that, as I said at the beginning. Yeah, I first would have asked Jesus, why are you not reading Isaiah 61 in context? Like, over and over again, it talks about Koresh restoring the waste places. Isaiah 44:28. It is I who says of Koresh, he is my shepherd, and all my good pleasure will be complete. And say of Jerusalem, she will be built, and the temple, your foundation will be laid. And then in 45:1, thus says Jehovah to Koresh his Messiah. And notice it didn't translate that as Messiah, because it wants you confused. They want you stuck in the net. Whom I have taken hold of by his right hand to subdue the nations before him, to loose the loins of king, to open before him the gates, and it will not be shut. Isaiah 52, right before the suffering servant, what does it say? Verse 9, break forth, shout joyfully together, you waste places of Jerusalem. For Jehovah has comforted his people, and he has redeemed Jerusalem. Jehovah has bared his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, that all the ends of the earth may see the salvation of our God. Depart, depart, go out from there. Touch nothing unclean, go out from the midst of your, purify yourselves. You who carry the vessels of Jehovah, but you will not go out in haste, nor will you go out as those who flee. For Jehovah will go before you, and the God of Israel will be your rear guard. So the whole thing with the servant suffering is contextually about the Babylonian exile. And I know for those of you still suffering under the net, you're like, that's impossible. Okay, let's go a little deeper. Look at this verse here. Verse 5 of Isaiah 53. He was pierced, which is not what it says. It says he was wounded through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our peace fell upon him, and by his wounds we were healed, right? And verse 4, before it, surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried or bore, yet we as self-esteemed and stricken. So look now at Ezekiel 4. Now as for you, son of man, get yourself a brick, set it before you, and inscribe a city on it, Jerusalem. Then set a siege against it, build a siege wall against it, raise a ramp against it, set up camps against it, place battering rams against it all around. Now as for you, get yourself an iron plate, set it up as an iron wall between you and the city, and establish your face toward it so that it is under siege, and besiege it. This is a sign of the house of Israel. Now as for you, lie down on your left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel on it. You see? Lay the iniquity on top of Ezekiel. You shall bear their iniquity. And it doesn't mean he's atoning for their sin. He's just showing the example of what sin does. He's bearing their iniquity as a sign of their sin. Now I have set a number of days for you corresponding to the years of their iniquity, 390 days, thus you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. So even if you want to say it was possible that Ezekiel atoned for their sin by bearing their iniquity, in order for Yeshua to do that, he would have to be on the cross for humanity for God knows how many days for the number of humanity. More than 6 hours, because Jehovah told Ezekiel that it was 1 day for every year of their iniquity. And we get back to this, 390 years of sin like it was talking about earlier. 390 years for their iniquity because they missed their Sabbaths and were sacrificing their own children. And this is something Ezekiel repeatedly talks about as well, as along with Jeremiah, who were both prophets in the time of Babylon. Ezekiel 20, verse 26. And I pronounced them unclean because of their gifts, in that they caused all their firstborn to pass through the fire. Yet you want me to believe that the firstborn of God passed through a sword of fire on the cross, a sacrifice offering for our sin, and Jehovah is pleased with it? There's no way. There's no way. Jeremiah 19:4. Because they have forsaken me, had made this foreign place, and have burned incense in it to other gods that neither they nor their fathers nor kings of Judah had ever known, and because they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent. They have built the high places to Baal, to burn their sons in the fire of burnt offerings to Baal, a thing which I never commanded or spoke of, nor did it ever come upon my heart. And this is why I truly believe that Genesis 22 was added. Excuse me. And we covered a lot today. I wanted to get to Proverbs 8, but I think that's going to have to wait for another day. I hope that this teaching reaches those who need to hear it, that you have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to perceive, and that you remain steadfast in Jehovah and his Torah. Just like Abraham, though, Abraham didn't have a written Torah. It was on his heart. Hallelujah.